Here's something that messes with me every time I think about it. Billions of people, 148 years of modern football, countless national leagues, Olympic tournaments, and continental trophies. And for the vast majority of that time, there was no World Cup. None. The sport that would become the single most watched event in human history, more than the Super Bowl, more than the Olympics, more than anything, existed for over a century before anyone sat down and said, you know what? Let's do this globally. And when someone finally did say that, the world told him he was insane. That man had a name, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why what he built wasn't just a sporting event. It was an act of defiance against an empire, and a bet that human beings, regardless of where they were born, fundamentally want to belong to something bigger than themselves. Stay with me. Because the origin of the World Cup is not what you think it is. Picture this. It's 1900. Football is already exploding across Europe and South America. Kids are playing it in the streets of Buenos Aires. Dock workers are organizing matches in Liverpool. Teams are forming in Uruguay, in France, in Italy. But here's the thing. These worlds never collide. They exist in complete isolation from each other. A Brazilian striker and a Hungarian forward could both be the greatest player alive in 1910, and they would never know. They'd never face each other. There was no stage for that. The Olympics had football, yes, but the Olympics were deeply, almost aggressively, elitist. Only amateur players could compete. No professionals, which meant the working class men who actually built this sport, the miners, the shipyard workers, the factory floor legends, were simply not allowed. You can feel the injustice in that, right? The most popular sport on earth belonged institutionally to the upper class. The people who actually loved it, who played it with their souls, were locked out of the highest stage. And then, into this broken system, walked Jules Rimet. Jules Rimet was a French lawyer, born in 1873, deeply Catholic, deeply idealistic, a man who genuinely believed, in a way that almost feels naive now, that sport could create world peace, not as a metaphor, literally. He thought that if nations competed on a pitch instead of a battlefield, something in the human heart would shift. He became president of FIFA in 1921. FIFA at the time was a small, struggling organization, 8-member nations, no money, no real authority. Most of the football establishment thought it was a bureaucratic nuisance, but Rimet had a vision that was almost dangerous in its scale. He wanted a tournament. Not just any tournament, the tournament. Every nation, every continent, one winner, a genuine World Cup. The British associations laughed. The IOC resisted. The major European clubs had no interest in releasing players. The logistics were nearly impossible. Remember, this was the 1920s. Transatlantic travel took weeks. Broadcasting didn't exist. And who was going to pay for all of this? But Rimet didn't stop. He kept pushing. He kept building alliances, lobbying federations, making promises he wasn't always sure he could keep. And in 1928, at an Olympic Congress in Amsterdam, FIFA finally voted. The first ever FIFA World Cup would happen. Now, here's where it gets wild. When FIFA voted to hold the first World Cup, they needed a host nation. And honestly, almost no one in Europe wanted it. The journey was too long. The cost was too high. European clubs didn't want to surrender their players for months. Italy bid, Spain bid, Sweden bid, Netherlands bid. And then Uruguay said, we'll pay for everything. Every team's travel, every team's accommodation, every team's expenses. They'd build a brand new, state-of-the-art stadium, the Centenario, in time for the tournament, which was also conveniently timed to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Uruguay's constitution. And look, this wasn't charity. Uruguay had won Olympic gold in 1924 and 1928. They were the best team on earth, and they knew it. They wanted to prove it on the grandest stage imaginable. This was national pride weaponized as hospitality. FIFA accepted. So in July 1930, 13 nations boarded ships and sailed to Montevideo, Uruguay, France, Mexico, Belgium, the United States, Argentina, Brazil, and others. The European teams almost didn't make it. France arrived with just days to spare. Their first match kicked off before the stadium was even finished. And yet, something electric happened. 70,000 people packed that new stadium on July 30th, 1930, to watch Uruguay face Argentina in the final. The crowd was so charged, so emotionally raw, that Argentine fans had to be searched for weapons at the gates. Uruguay won 4-2. A small South American nation, landlocked, just 3 million people, became the first world champions in human history. Jules Rimet walked onto the pitch and personally handed over a small golden trophy. That trophy, by the way, it was later named after him. The Jules Rimet Trophy, and it would be competed for, stolen, found, competed for again, and eventually retired, permanently given to Brazil after their third title in 1970. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Here's the thing that gets me when I sit with this story. Jules Rimet didn't just invent a football tournament. He created a ritual, a global ritual that would outlast every war, every political division, every technological revolution of the 20th century. Think about what the World Cup has survived. It was canceled in 1942 and 1946 because of World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history. It came back in 1950. It's been held in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. 48 nations will compete at the 2026 edition across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of one man's obsession made permanent. But here's the deeper truth, and this is the part I really want you to sit with. Rimet succeeded not because of the logistics, or the stadiums, or the prize money. He succeeded because he understood something fundamental about human beings. We need collective ritual. We need moments where the whole world is watching the same thing at the same time, where a kid in Baku and a grandmother in Sao Paulo and a teenager in Tokyo are all holding their breath at the exact same second. That's not entertainment, that's communion, and the World Cup at its best delivers that. Every 4 years, reliably, like clockwork. Which brings us to right now, 2026. For the first time in history, 48 teams will compete. The tournament expands across 3 countries, the US, Canada, and Mexico, reuniting the continent that hosted that very first quietly revolutionary tournament back in 1930. New nations will qualify for the first time. New stories will be written. There will be upsets that no one predicted, moments of heartbreak that define careers, and one final match where the entire planet holds its breath together. And somewhere in that crowd, or watching from a tiny apartment screen, or huddled around a phone at 2 a.m., will be millions of people who have no idea that any of this happened because a French lawyer from a small village refused to accept that the world was too big to share a game. We talk about the World Cup like it was inevitable, like of course it exists. Like of course the whole world stops every 4 years to watch 22 players chase a ball. But it wasn't inevitable. It was willed into existence by someone who was repeatedly told it was impossible. Jules Rimet died in 1956, 2 years after the World Cup he built had already become the most watched sporting event on Earth. He never saw the satellite broadcast that would beam matches to 1 billion people simultaneously. He never saw the World Cup in Africa or Asia or the expanded 48-team format. He never saw the golden trophy that carried his name lifted in stadiums he could never have imagined, but he saw the seed of it. He saw Uruguay lift that small trophy in 1930 while 70,000 people roared, and he understood. He knew that something irreversible had just happened. The next time you watch a World Cup match, whether it's 2026 or beyond, and you feel that thing, that inexplicable feeling in your chest when the anthem plays or a last-minute goal hits the net, that feeling has a name. It's called belonging, and it was invented in 1930 by a man who simply refused to believe that the world was too divided to play together. That's worth remembering. Subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring you fascinating videos covering everything from hidden mysteries and shocking discoveries to incredible stories that will change the way you see the world. Don't miss out on the next one.